So now, as we conclude Hebrews, we are confronted with the challenge of two mountains. So let's just jump in verse 18. So the author, the pastor to Hebrews, he's saying this to his church, and he says, you have not come to a physical mountain, to a place of flaming fire, darkness, gloom, and whirlwind, as the Israelites did at Mount Sinai. For they heard an awesome trumpet blast and a voice so terrible that they begged God to stop speaking. They staggered back under God's command. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. Moses himself was so frightened at the sight that he said, I'm terrified and trembling. So just to get a sense of what the author of Hebrews is giving us here, what he's talking about, the strings that he's pulling, let's just read a little bit out of Exodus and kind of get a sense of what he's talking about. So Moses goes up the mountain. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will come to you in a thick cloud, so the people themselves can hear me when I speak with you, Moses. Then they will always trust you. Moses told the Lord what the people had said. And then the Lord told Moses, go down and prepare the people for my arrival. Consecrate them today and tomorrow and have them wash their clothing. Be sure they are ready on the third day. For on that day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch. Mark off a boundary all around the mountain. Warn the people, be careful. Do not go up on the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the mountain will certainly be put to death. No hand may touch the person or animal that crosses the boundary. Instead, stone them or shoot them with arrows. They must be put to death. However, when the ram's horn sound a long blast, then the people may go up on the mountain. Whoa, right? This is some kind of scary passage here with some scary language, right? Stone them, kill them. And in the midst of this language of preparation, prepare yourself. Take some days to prepare yourself, to clean yourself, examine yourself, be ready, because God will reveal himself to the nation. He wants us to catch in this stark language a reality here that God is holy. Now, what does that mean? Now, holiness of God has to be understood through the centrality of the fact that God is the creator and author of all things. He's the creating force behind the whole universe. He's the only being with the power to make the world with all its beauty, with all its majesty. He's the being behind all this mysterious reality. He's the one that created everything from nothing. So holiness, God being holy, has to do with all of goodness of God and his opposition to death. And so now Israelites who find themselves at Mount Sinai, there's bugs everywhere. Sorry about that. I think last week one landed on me, but I didn't want to stop. Anyways, I was right in a good moment here too. All right. Creator of all things, God does all these good things, and we step out of it. And now Israelites who have been in slavery are at the foot of the mountain, getting ready to hear God. And he's giving them the law, and the pastor stresses that at the sheer majesty of God, he stresses that all of creation, right here in this moment, his presence and his goodness, as they need to prepare themselves because they will be exposed. Their hearts, all those things will be exposed before the goodness of God. So prepare yourself. Prepare yourself. And this is where then the pastor juxtapositions that experience with the mountain and God's holiness with his church's experience and their mountain. And so he says, some translations will say, but you, and NLT says, no, you have come, not like you didn't go to Mount Sinai, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the countless thousands of angels in a joyful gathering. You have come to the assembly of God's firstborn children, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God himself, who is the judge over all things. You have come to the spirits of the righteous ones in heaven, who have now been made perfect. You have come to Jesus, the one who mediates the new covenant, the new promise, the new agreement between God and people. and to the sprinkled blood. So again, there's just so many areas he's going to. He's talking about the Passover, where death passed over. They sprinkled blood on the doorsteps, but then he connects it with Jesus' blood, and now he's connecting, which he speaks of forgiveness. So Jesus' blood speaks of forgiveness instead of crying out for vengeance like the blood of Abel. But you, he says, you have come to Mount Zion, not Sinai. Mount Zion now is a central part of Jerusalem, which King David captured and made a royal city. And then later on that Mount Zion is where the temple is built. And now the temple is, for Israelites, where God's presence would be, right? Heaven and earth touching, mountains, and now the temple. The presence of God would be in the Holy of Holies in the temple. It is exact space in the Jewish imagination between heaven and earth where they were overlapping and connecting. It is a space where God meets with our space, where the presence of God shows up and reveals and exposes our hearts. So is God vengeful? Is he angry? Do we have a different God in the Old Testament, a new God here? Like God at Mount Sinai was this way, but now we have Jesus. We have this new God. Is that what's happening here? I don't think so. What we have here is introduction to how holy and good God is, how set apart he is, that he pleads and leads people to prepare themselves, because in light of him, in light of his goodness, we will all feel exposed. And he knows that. So he finds a way in Jesus for us to step into his presence. This is the good news. That despite all that stuff that rises up in us, despite all the things that we've thought or done or carry in our hearts, God says, I love you. And in Jesus, you can be in my presence because I'm making you holy. Friends, are you listening? This is good news. So we have to wrestle in his journey, because all of us actually live on one of these mountains. When we look for meaning and hope, when we come to God's presence at one of the mountains, we actually are in those spaces. And when we're looking for God's presence and we're like, where are you, God? Sometimes we come with all these things. I need to do this and this and this. I need to prepare myself, and then maybe God won't hurt me. Or do we come to God in Jesus, recognizing that there's grace offered to us, and so we step into that grace, but we don't take it lightly. We actually begin to live in grace. We live on one of these mountains, all of us do, and we will feel exposed. Our hearts, our minds in the presence of holiness will be exposed, and we have a choice. We have a choice in that moment. When we feel exposed at the foot of the mountain, when we feel exposed at the holiness and goodness of God, we have a choice. Will we humble ourselves as the holiness exposes all of myself before God? And will I humble myself to Jesus and say, I am messed up and I need your help? Will I humble myself at the Mount Zion and say, God, I just need you. My heart holds so much violence and I can't heal it on my own. All that exposing, will I humble myself before God and accept his grace? And in Jesus, we can be in that presence of God, in that goodness, because he's making us holy. That is his desire, that we come to him and be with him. Our journey with Jesus is preparing us to move towards Jesus into his presence, into the presence of God. I know, this is like a heavy way to conclude a series. But this is the reality of the goodness of God, that he's for you. He's not against you. He's not against you. So the question for us as we end our series is, which mountain are you on? Will you humble yourself in light of the need and exposing, in light of being exposed to God's holiness and goodness? Will you humble yourself and allow Jesus to work in you and through you? Will you accept the offering of grace and mercy that he just so readily wants to give you? Will you allow God's holiness to become incredible good news for you? Or will you harden your heart? Will you, inside of God's holiness, be, and inside of being exposed, be like, you don't get it. It was better over there than with you, if that's what you're offering me. Which mountain are you on?